up and it's going to be a face without the book. Book without the face.
Hey, Megan, how are you?
Now they're chipping away at the normalization of pedophilia, and the left is embracing this type of behavior.
We welcome Dinesh D'Souza.
I know I ticked him off. In a certain sense, it's a giant up yours to Obama, and that's why the left is freaking out over it.
Jack Kennedy and LBJ, Clinton, and the double standard from the left.
Yeah, I love how the left does nothing but push the most bizarre practices down our throats and up our tailpipes.
It takes a real man to tackle the hot issues that really matter.
Michael Hart is the man of this house.
Welcome to the Michael Hart Show.
Hello again. This is the January 31st edition of the Michael Hart Show right here on the Heart of America Talk Radio Network. That opening little snippet from Kamala Harris, who wants to be your president of the United States, about 10 years ago, threatening to incarcerate the parents of truant school children, even if they are of high school age, all the way down to elementary school as well. We'll take a little closer look at what those comments were all about. That was just a small portion of the audio. We've got a whole lot more to talk about with that story, as well as her positions on privatized health care. Also, the state of Virginia, apparently they are feeling kind of left out in the cold, no pun intended, when it comes to the right to kill babies. And so they apparently are joining on the New York bandwagon and going to introduce legislations that would allow them to take life all the way up to the day of birth. And the Virginia bill is even more aggressive than the New York version. We've got that story. Also, about 30 minutes from now, not even that long, we'll be having a conversation with Eddie Ryder of the Land Report, as well as Scott Jones, who is a forester. We're going to be talking a bit about land management, but we're going to be doing it through a governmental perspective. And what I mean by that is that we're going to be talking about some of the idiotic regulations that the forestry industry has to deal with. California wildfires was the inspiration for this little chat. The three of us are going to be in studio, so it's a little bit different style than we're normally used to here. So keep your fingers crossed that I can make the technology work and the audio work and all that good stuff. But we are going to be talking a little bit about exactly why the government is, in fact, vis-a-vis Trump, responsible for what has happened in California, and that the president, the current president, had warned Californians about this. We're going to get firsthand from people that are in the industry exactly what the problem is. And yes, as you can imagine, it's government bureaucracy. And also today, a little bit later on, Megan Barth of ReaganBabe.com is going to pop by and hang out with us. It is our weekly speed date with Megan right here on the Heart of America Talk Radio Network. Okay, so don't even really know where to start, so we'll just kind of start in the middle. Everybody is having these debates about the Democrats, the walls, the shutdowns, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, people that have been talking very anti-Israel, that have been recently inaugurated or sworn in, whatever you want to call it, and how completely whack, and I do mean whack, I mean completely effed up the Democrat Party seems to have become. And as we've had these debates about the shutdown and immigration, we've talked about what people have said in the past, because your past actions do, in fact, matter. What they have implied, what they've stood on. Obama was for the wall, Hillary was for the wall, Barbara Boxer was for a barrier, and on and on and on. And people seem to just kind of dismiss this as though it doesn't matter. During the 2016 election, as well as 2012 and 08, there was a lot of discussion about vetting candidates and vetting presidential candidates in particular. The same issue was raised with Brett Kavanaugh. Now, in the case of Brett Kavanaugh, we're going all the way back to high school and college. In the case of Kamala Harris, we don't have to go back so far. But this is a woman that has called for private health care plans to be abolished. Now, again, remember, she's running for president. So she wants to abolish private health care plans, which is the latest plank in what is becoming an increasingly left-wing platform from the, from the office of Kamala. I'm going to come up with something better to call it than that. But anyway, she announced, of course, her 2020 bid for the White House this last week and was asked by Jake Tapper on CNN if people could keep their current health care plan under the Medicare for All plan. She indicated that they couldn't, suggesting that she wants to move towards a single-payer system rather than mere expansion of Medicare. Now, I want to point out that going into a single-payer system where you, for all intent and purposes, are abolishing insurance companies or insurance providers, that by definition, is fascism. You see, that's something else that's kind of fun and funny about dealing with a lot of the liberal Democrat socialists out there that keep saying Donald Trump is a fascist. And frankly, he's the exact opposite, because that's just their, demonstrating that they don't know what the hell they're talking about. So here we have this notion that we are going to eradicate the health insurance industry and government take it over entirely. Then a video surfaced yesterday from 2010 where Kamala Harris, who at the time was, or Kamala if you prefer, was at the time California's Attorney General, and was described with self-satisfaction how being tough on truancy got results when she was San Francisco's district attorney. That was a little piece of it that you heard leading in. But if you look at the story and the idea about the elimination of healthcare providers and it all being governmental, and now she's calling for arresting parents for truancy. I know that a lot of these kids get in trouble. Her underlying foundational point that if you keep them in school, they have a better chance of being successful and not getting in trouble. That underlying point is in fact correct. But you just can't go around arresting parents because their kids skip school. This is a matter of government managing and mandating every aspect of your life. Over here, we're going to take care of your insurance. Over here, we're going to loan you your kids. But if you don't get your kids into our government school, we are going, not fine you, we are going to arrest you and put you in jail. And then if you look at things like, and there's a story that we're not going to have time to get into today, but now the FBI is being called out on the heavy-handedness with the arrest of Roger Stone. Listen to this audio. We're going to play it in full in its entirety. It's only about 2 minutes long. Kamala Harris from 2010 talking about arresting parents, and she's talking about doing it with, she uses the word political capital and the fact that she has a badge. And so through the eyes of many people, particularly on the socialist left, if you have the authority to manage behavior, then you have the right to manage behavior. And I'd also like to point out that some of the minority groups that are most supportive of Kamala Harris would in fact be some of the parents of some of the children that demographically speaking are more apt to be truant. But then again, since when in the hell did the facts ever matter? Here's Kamala Harris from 2010.
I would not be standing here were it not for the education I received. And I know many of us will say the same thing. And I believe a child going without an education is tantamount to a crime. So I decided I was going to start prosecuting parents for truancy. Well, this was a little controversial in San Francisco. And frankly, my staff went bananas. They were very concerned because we didn't know at the time whether I was going to have an opponent in my re-election race. But I said, look, I'm done. This is a serious issue, and I've got a little political capital, and I'm going to spend some of it. And this is what we did. We recognized that in that initiative, as a prosecutor and law enforcement, I have a huge stick. The school district has got a carrot. Let's work in tandem around our collective objective and goal, which is to get those kids in school. So, to that end, on my letterhead, now let me tell you something about my letterhead. When you're the DA of a major city in this country, usually the job comes with a badge. And there is often an artistic rendering of said badge on your stationery. So I sent a letter out on my letterhead to every parent in the school district, outlining the connection that was statistically proven between elementary school truancy, high school dropouts, who will become a victim of crime, and who will become a perpetrator of crime. We sent it out to everyone. A friend of mine actually called me and he said, Kamala, my wife got the letter. She freaked out. She brought all the kids into the living room, held up the letter, said, if you don't go to school, Kamala's going to put you and me in jail. Yes, we achieved intended effect.
Indeed. So is that what you want? Is that what this nation needs? Is a heavy-handed, bureaucratic prosecutor? Now, the actual video is longer than that, but she also went into talking about how she wanted her prosecutors, when they met with parents, by the way, to, quote, look really mean. In other words, Gestapo-esque intimidation factors. Now, again, I'm not arguing with the issue of truancy, because I skipped school a few times. I'm sure several of you did as well, and I never skipped it to get to the library or to go worship. I was always getting in trouble whenever I did it. But why in the world? And by the way, talking about the woman who held up the photo of the letterhead to her children, she was a single mother who had 2 jobs and 3 children who were not going to all of their classes because presumably she was not able to parent because she was trying to raise her kids. So by all means, let's scare the ever-living hell out of her and everybody. And in the video, she talks about scaring parents. And how in the world are you supposed to police, if you will, your own children? But that, coupled with the fact that she now wants to eradicate, alleviate, eliminate private insurance plans, should demonstrate in no uncertain terms that this woman is a complete socialist, almost to the degree of fascism. And the simple fact of the matter is that if you elect her or anyone that even holds her political views, you are in essence electing a socialist that will govern every aspect of your life. But then again, maybe that's what some people want. Quick break, coming right back to the other side. We're going to take a look at what's going on in the Virginia abortion bill. They jumped on board as well. And then a little bit later on, probably the bottom of the hour, we'll have a conversation with some guys who can tell you some really interesting, bizarre, and concerning facts about the United States government and land management in this country and from the front lines. You're listening to the Michael Hart Show right here on the Heart of America Broadcasting Network. Stick around. We'll be right back. The Land Report, the magazine for the American landowner, is a proud supporter of the Michael Hart Show. Currently, they're offering an exclusive subscription price for listeners of the Michael Hart Show. So click on the subscribe button on landreport.com and enter the code HARTSHOW at checkout and receive a 1-year discount on America's #1 land magazine. You'll get a full year of the Land Report, which normally goes for $59, for only $15. That's a 75% savings off the cover price. Again, that's promo code HARTSHOW at checkout of thelandreport.com, and make sure to check out the Land Report on Facebook if you love land.
Hi, I'm a spokesperson for the Democratic Party, and I'm here to tell you why you need to vote blue this November. Democrats are the party of love and tolerance. We promote inclusion and acceptance, peace, and goodwill. Republicans don't care about any of these things. They just want to talk about record unemployment, the economy, and keeping communities safe. Fascists. Democrats have positive, practical priorities, like abolishing the Electoral College, eliminating due process, and banning hate speech. These are the values of the American people. Well, at least Americans that live in San Francisco and New York. Republicans often use fear-mongering rhetoric like Constitution or liberty. Democrats condemn such language as divisive and instead focus on more unifying topics like repealing the Second Amendment or kneeling for the national anthem. Democrats are the party of equality, So much so that we insist upon unconditionally believing women and disbelieving men because, well, feminism. If you ask us to explain this logically, we will scream in your face and call you a misogynist. Republicans want to take away a woman's sacred right to choose to have her child decapitated inside the womb and torn apart limb by limb with forceps. Democrats celebrate the right to violently murder your child because we're compassionate. Democrats believe that women are powerful and independent. They are also helpless victims of the patriarchy who require government intervention to succeed. Any woman who disagrees with us on this is a self-hating, stupid bimbo. And you know, it's time someone was finally brave enough to say this. Republicans are racist. Democrats have the same positive message for minorities that we have for women. For your own certain people from coming into this country. They cite the infiltration of gang violence or opioids or sex trafficking. That's why we reject capitalism and all of its greed and then set up for socialism, which has worked so well every time it's been tried. Democrats are the senseless, while Republicans...
this type of behavior.
Welcome to Nesta Souza.
I know I ticked him off. In a certain sense, it's a giant up yours to Obama, and that's why the left is freaking out over it.
Jack Kennedy and LBJ, Clinton, and the double standard from the left.
Yeah, I love how the left does nothing but push the most bizarre practices down our throats and up our tailpipes.
It takes a real man to tackle the hot issues that really matter.
Michael Hart is the man of this house.
Welcome to the Michael Hart Show.
We're having a conversation now with Scott Jones from the Forest Landowners Association, as well as Eddie Lee Ryder, the publisher of the Land Report, right here out of Birmingham, Alabama. And one of the reasons I wanted to talk to these guys is obviously in the last several months, particularly as it relates to Paradise, California, and the wildfires, a tremendous loss of life. There's been a lot of debate and discussion as to whether or not President Trump responded appropriately in terms of some comments that he made about land management, forest management. Certainly not my field of expertise at all. These two gentlemen, however, definitely have the inside scoop as to what is going on with land management, whether or not forest fires are in fact preventable, perhaps some of the EPA regulations that seem to plague many people, not only in the Midwest, but, we've had conversations over the years about the Bureau of Land Management, and it kind of parrots even into some of the discussions about immigration. Now, although this is not a political conversation whatsoever, the management of America's farmlands and forest lands are certainly of utmost importance. and we welcome Scott Jones of the Forest Land Owners Association, as well as Eddie Lee Ryder, into this edition of the Michael Hart Show here on the Heart of America Talk Radio Network. How are you guys?
Thank you, Michael. Doing very well.
Scott, I'm going to get you I'm going to start out with you for just a moment and give us the listeners just a little bit more background as to exactly what it is that you do and some of the concerns that you might have as it relates to forest management.
Well, just quickly, I'm a forester by education. Spent 5 years managing land and buying wood for a paper mill. I then made my way into the policy side, working at the state level in Georgia, and then working across the southeast on behalf of privately owned sawmills. And now for the past 15 years, I've been representing private forest landowners. So not only is my background and training in forestry, I also have lands that have been in my family since the early 1800s, and I live on a small farm myself. So I have not only the training here, but I also have personal stake in the game when it comes to the management of private forest lands in the U.S. So working on behalf of the private forest landowners all across the country at the Forest Landowners Association help them not only be economically successful with their property, but be able to pass that land down to the next generation is really what success is for us. So that's what I do day in and day out every day.
I know over the course of the last several days and months even on this program, we've talked about things like land management and the White House's response to what goes on or went on in California. And Eddie and I, we've known each other for several years now. We've had several conversations about some of the EPA and land management practices that may very well be at least somewhat of a motivator to some of the problems that we've seen. And we're looking particularly California at this moment. Can either one of you guys, because what I wanted to do here was kind of be just very, very conversational about it and have an open and honest discussion as things that you see that are working, not working, and certainly need improvement. So either one of you guys.
I'm gonna let Scott handle the technical question. That's not my area of expertise, but all I can speak to is the fact that Scott and I have had this conversation for years, and I've been privy to conversations with landowners in California, landowners across the country due to the publication of the land report. And there has been an issue that is, in my mind, has not been addressed.
Yeah, I agree, Eddie. And, one thing we talk about is looking at environmental regulation and controls of land use as a pendulum. And, at one point in time, say when we first started really managing natural resources and land in this country, I would say maybe the pendulum was too far to the left. We took a very heavy-handed approach. There wasn't a whole lot of thought about the future. We'd go in and just cut large tracts of land, especially out west, and, clear off mountaintops. We're not there now. I mean, what we've done is we've seen the pendulum swing so far right, and regulation gets so onerous and so overbearing that you can't do anything now. And anything left untended, uncontrolled, is bound to have some sort of deteriorating consequences. And with the fires, like you mentioned, Michael, that's the consequence. That's the outcome of not having any control at all and saying, let's let nature run its course, and we'll allow these homes to be built in these areas. We'll all encroach in on nature, not manage it, and then wonder why we have such devastating outcomes. I mean, it's not right, and it's not fair to the people that live in that area that we take a public resource that is entrusted to us, and then we don't utilize and don't take care of it. I mean, that's why the folks I represent, we own and manage 58% of the forest in the U.S. And yeah, there's difference in topography, there's difference in climate and weather from, say, the southeast to the west coast. But still, when you go out and look at the west coast, you'll see a patchwork design. And the reason why there's a patchwork landscape in the west is there's patches that are owned by private individuals, there's patches that are owned by the federal government. And the reason why you can literally fly over and see these patches. And the reason why you can distinguish one from the other is one's being managed and one's not. And so the problem is the stuff that's not being managed, our federal lands, actually have a bad consequence on their neighbors, the private individuals. Because those unmanaged land create bug problems, forest health issues, fires that get burning out of control and so hot they sweep across these private lands as well. So President Trump's comments, to go back to your original question, President Trump's comments were right on. Did they hit hard? Did they touch a nerve? Did they maybe make us feel bad that, we all know that we should have been doing this? Yeah, probably so. I mean, there's got to be a little bit of sense of guilt to say, we know we weren't managing these, we know we should have, but we didn't have the guts to go in and enact the legislation or stand up to some of the right-wing groups whose only end goal is land use control and say we have to manage these resources. So, I applaud the president and Zinke in the administration for having the guts to stand up and call a spade, point out the problem and say, this is what the issue is, and now, having executive orders to say, let's go in and do something about it, because obviously it's going to take something like an executive order because no one else is standing up to do what needs to be done.
When we take a look at California, for example, I'm assuming, and you got to bear in mind, I'm very naive in this situation, okay? So I'm assuming that we're talking about, unchecked underbrush or just the removal or the lack of removal as it relates to, debris in the area. Is what occurred out there specifically, because obviously that was a big trending news story for many people in the country, is what occurred out there really more a matter of, the environmental concerns that they seem to think that it is? Because, and I don't want to go all conspiratorial here or political, but, the people that listen to this program are very up to speed with the discussion of, like, the Bundy family and what took place out with their ranch and whatnot, and the use of federal lands. And so there is somewhat of a measure of suspicion for at least some people as it relates to government intervention, as it relates, again, to land management. And I know that in the state of California, a lot of that was environmental decisions, but is there a role that the government, in terms of the EPA, the federal government, needs to be playing as far as the land management practices? Is it something they have to hold the state of California to? Is it something they need to implement new rules and regulations? To what degree do we need to become involved with that? And again, I'll turn this back over to either one of you guys.
The difficult part of this is the situation we find ourselves in this country with respect to forest resources. We're oversupplied right now. All across the U.S., we're growing more wood than we're able to use. And that's causing problems in itself with private forest landowners and getting lower prices for their products than they're used to. And that makes it hard for them to stay and keep investing in that property. When you're not getting the returns you're used to, you can't invest the money into the land management that you would like to. And it also brings up the question, is this still a good investment? But when you look at how private forest landowners manage their land, they're allowed to, and regulations currently are very friendly to them to allow them to continue to manage land. The same with farmlands and ranch lands too.
Sure.
I mean, private property rights are still very well respected, and they're very well understood. So when you're looking at the way private landowners manage, they do such a good job that we don't see these kind of catastrophes. And I don't know that I would say that there's a conspiracy that, but when you look at the way other countries manage the lands that are in their control, say like Canada, a majority of the land in Canada, especially the forest land, is owned by the Crown. And what does the Crown do? They utilize it as a jobs program.
Sure.
They utilize it as a way to economically create economic stimulus for their country. They sell wood from their lands in blocks to mills that employ their people who pay taxes. They have loggers and truckers and everyone else, and that's how they utilize their natural resources. And then here we have these huge swaths of land, mostly on the West Coast, that are owned by our government, and yet there's this hands-off approach that says, we're not going to use it to stimulate our country. I mean, it's almost, it makes you feel bad as an American to sit there and say, this belongs to all of us, and yet we're going to let a very small minority, but very vocal minority, dictate the policy of how we're going to manage these lands. And it's got to change at some point in time. And it takes, you hate to say it takes a campfire, because it was horrible, and it was terrible what happened out there, and there was so much loss of life, and it's not their fault. But you would hope that something good could come of that. And maybe the thing that good come of it is, it almost goes back to the days of the Depression, and you say, we can put Americans to work, we can create jobs, we can get products moving again, because we have the resource to do it, and it solves problems. I mean, we don't have these problems on private lands because people are caring for and and managing the land and cutting the timber and doing a great job of it. I mean, the environmental stewardship across this country on forest lands is a success story that's unrivaled. Yet other countries are utilizing their resources, to the benefit of the people in the country and for the benefit of their economy. And yet here we don't do it, and something's got to give. There has to be a breaking point at some point that makes us all wake up and say, now let's start doing what's right by this. I'm not saying we swing back on the pendulum all the way back to where we were before. Mm-hmm. I don't think anyone wants that. But there is a middle ground, and we're not there. We're still way over on the wrong side of the pendulum of just locking this up. I guess that's really the story that needs to be told is it's got to get back to the middle. And there has to be some compromise somewhere. But being all the way over on one side and let a vocal minority control this through environmental controls and regulations, it's not right for all of us to just accept that. So when Trump comes out with an executive order to say we're going to start managing this, when he says that mismanagement was what caused these fires, is it 100% true? No, nothing ever is. But it's mostly true. It really is. It's 75% true because something else sparked it. Yeah, there are weather conditions, and yes, it was dry. Mm-hmm. But a fire doesn't burn without fuel, and the fuel load was there, and it was ready to go, and that can be controlled.
Considering the amount of death and destruction, Scott, by the way, we're having a conversation with Scott Jones of the Forest Landowners Association. Also in studio with us today, Eddie Lee Ryder, publisher of the Land Report. Considering what happened primarily in California, within your own industry or your circle of influence or whatever, what are you hearing from the people that would be the ones that perhaps would be, hopefully, consulted on these environmental policies? There's got to be some frustration because, you pointed out about getting back to more common sense initiatives or common sense approach as opposed to what is currently happening. But there's got to be an enormous amount of frustration within your industry and concern. And not only would I like to know what they're thinking, I'd also like to know, since we seem to have gone so far left on some of these ideas, these policies and programs, how we got to this point. Is it just purely environmentally driven? Was it just under the Jerry Brown administration in the case of California? What are your people saying, and how do we get back to this place?
So we didn't get here overnight. That's for sure. You go back to times where the Cuyahoga River was catching on fire, and in some of the Rachel Carlson's Silent Spring book that came out in '69. All these started driving kind of an environmental movement, and then, we get the Nixon and Carter administration pushing environmental legislation and the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act and the Endangered Species Act are major revisions to those acts. And then all those start getting put to the test in the 80s. And as those get put to the test, new precedents start getting set to say the way to manage is through preservation, not utilization. And this goes all the way back to the days of Pinchot and Muir. When John Muir was starting the Sierra Club, he was a preservationist, and when Pinchot was hired by the Biltmore family to be the first forester of this country at the Biltmore Estate in Nashville, he was a utilization guy. And so this debate goes back a long way. But where we are in the debate now is that we're not listening to both sides. Private landowners are off here on their own, managing in a utilization fashion and showing what the benefits of that can be. And the benefits are that these lands can still clean water, provide resources, they can harbor endangered species, provide wildlife habitat, do all of these things. There's multiple uses that can happen on these properties while making these landowners economically successful with their ownership. And over on the federal side, we've gone completely to preservationists. And so to just sit over there on the preservationist side is to ignore all the good work, all the science, everything that's happened. And so the way we get back is really, we've been saying this for years, it's not going to be a new administrator of the EPA. It's not going to be a new head of the Department of Interior. It's not going to be new head of the USDA or even a head of the Forest Service that understands this. It's going to take a paradigm shift that starts deep within the agencies, because these agencies, like the EPA, have career bureaucrats that have been working there with agendas for a long time. And to clean those people out, to clear those out, is going to take time. And so there has to be a dedicated effort, not to just one time up there say, okay, we're going to go talk to these people and try to educate it. It has to be a wholesale communications approach to make this change. I mean, you guys do it in the land report. We've been doing it through our communication efforts. We have one called Forest America. It's all on our website at forestlandowners.com. But we're doing all this work to try to change the thought process or change the perspective of the way people look at wood products and our forests, not as a way just something that should be preserved, but something that should be celebrated and utilized because of all the multiple benefits they provide.
I know that when you came in today, as you are in studio with us live, Eddie gave you a copy of my book, Unknown America, and it's just weird stuff from history that people didn't know about. But I have a whole section in here on the states, and under each state, I put a little designation of something weird which happened in that state. Under the state of Ohio, the Cuyahoga River that runs through Cleveland is so polluted it's caught fire 15 times. So, I find it pretty funny that you bring that up in this conversation as well. Considering everything going on within the forestry industry, and you kind of alluded to this as well, because obviously the river's in a forest, does this speak to the environmental policy in this nation as a whole, or is it just exclusive to the forestry industry? Because it seems to me if the river caught fire 15 times, and you have all these other issues, we're having debates about, carbon offsets and global warming and whether or not we're polluting the ionosphere and the stratosphere. Is this all part, and I'm not suggesting global warming is true or not. I don't even take a position on that for the purposes of this program. But what I do want to get to is this a forestry initiative or a forestry policy that needs to be changed, or is it an overarching reexamination of our environmental policy as a whole?
Yeah, it's a great question and an interesting parallel as well, right? Maybe the forests are the Cuyahoga River right now, and maybe we're seeing the same result of that. And getting in and managing it is really the key. And I do think that it's not just unique to forestry. I think it's unique. I think it spans across all land use. I mean, if I were sitting here as the head of the Farm Bureau, I would be saying the same thing. If I were sitting here as head of the Cattlemen's Association or the Cotton Growers Association or the poultry manufacturers, I'd be saying the same thing. And that same observation that we have is that environmental legislation has led to economic downturn. It threatens business. It takes freedom of operation in these businesses away. And these people, we've come so far. I mean, we're not where we used to be. We manage forests in a very scientific, very environmentally friendly manner. We do the same thing with chicken houses and poultry and the pork industry and the farming. I mean, everything has gotten down to an exact science, and we've put so much work and effort in this. Yet none of it is recognized. We're regulating like we were back in the 60s and 70s, and yeah, that's going to take a wholesale change. And really, it's not unique to forestry. It's across all these industries. So, what does that say? It says that we're not just sitting here, complaining or fussing about our private little group. It's 11 million landowners in the U.S., but it's not just this group complaining. It's across all these land uses, and it's impacting us all. So we have to look and say, how do we want to take care of dirt in the U.S.? I mean, it's a finite resource, right? They're not making any more land, right?
Correct.
Isn't that the whole thing?
It's one of our largest things at the land report.
Right. So we're not making any more land. So how do we use the land that we have in this country? And if we want to see it productive, and we want to see it benefit this country, we want to see it be the solution to a lot of our economic and environmental issues, then we have to make that decision as a country that we're going to manage it this way. And so we've got to take the handcuffs off, not only the folks that are being regulated right now in the private sector, but also off our federal government and the way that they're managing lands, because those lands, it's a lot of land, impacts, and I'm sure your members and your readers say the same thing. I mean, if they're butting up against public lands, that's not really a positive thing all the time.
Right. It many times it becomes a sales point with land brokers, but as you point out, sometimes it's not a positive thing.
Yeah, especially if there's forests on there that aren't being managed, and you've got a threat of whether it's forest insects or other health issues or fire coming off those things in a strong fashion and impacting your property. And so, I mean, that's a real worry. I mean, it happens here in the South. You get uncontrolled kudzu, say, coming off of federal lands, and the federal government's not going to spray it. They're not going to take care of it. But it's going to come on your property, and you will have to. So, it's not unique to this sector. I mean, we all have these issues with regulation and regulating like we're back in the 60s and 70s, and ignoring where we are and all the advances that have been made to make all these industries really a part of success story of America.
Over the course of the last several years, I have addressed initiatives of the United Nations, sustainable development, watersheds, waterways, and whether or not the Cahaba lily lizard is an endangered species. A lot of people are very suspicious when the government gets involved, and I'm not saying that the government shouldn't, because I understand the problem is bad. But what do we say to the people? And I also realize that the government's not the UN. But over the course of the last several years, there's been a lot of debate and discussion and concern about some of the regulations being too intrusive. And I think it might almost be to the point where we can't necessarily fix this over here, so maybe we're going to tweak that over there. I don't really even know how that works, Scott, but I'm just kind of curious that, we oftentimes hear the terminology comprehensive immigration reform. Should we have comprehensive environmental protection reform? Because it's not just a matter of protections of the land, as you point out. It's also management of the lands and, to maximize the potential of the lands at the same time. But I think a lot of people have gotten very suspicious of it, and it would seem from my perspective, unless I'm terribly wrong, that some of these states have kind of jumped in and superseded the federal government. So all that to say this, looking at California, are there not federal regulations in place already that they would have had to have adhered to, or do they have the right, by virtue of this amalgamation of rules and policies we see out there now, do they have the right to make their own environmental decisions, and should there be nationalized policy on it?
Well, I'm a big believer in states' rights and states having more control over what they can do in their states. And so state environmental protection divisions, state forestry commissions, I really believe in decentralizing government control of these lands and giving it back out to the states, because I think they have much more ability they understand the landscape more, they can be out there on the ground a lot more, and they can control what's in their state. So trying to pass, federal waters of the U.S. legislation, it's crazy. I mean, and trying to have federal cap and trade and federal energy legislation, that's why we don't have it right now, because it's too big of a lift. And, what works in one place doesn't work in another. So we're going to have renewable energy in Alabama by Alabama Power putting windmills in South Dakota. That doesn't make any sense at all. It doesn't allow us to use the resources that we say have available here where we are today. Where we could use wood and other things to meet those goals. So I really believe that, trying to have comprehensive environmental reform is very difficult, but I think there's things we can do to get us back on track to where we need to be today. Good example, and you mentioned the Endangered Species Act, so I'll use that as an example, is in order to list or have a petition the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to have a species reviewed for potential listing protection under the Endangered Species Act, you could do that on a cocktail napkin. You could literally sit there on a napkin with a pen and say, I really think you need to look into the water dog up in northern Alabama, and turn that in. And under the rules, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service would have to take that seriously. So team of scientists get together, they all start getting, we have to put measures in place while it's under review, under determination. All this gets set into place. And so it's not necessarily, and I agree with you 100%, Michael, that we don't want to be without any environmental regulations, any environmental controls, because you have to be able to monitor and control bad actors. And there's got to be rules to the game. But when you set up the system to be ripe for abuse, then you've got to close those loopholes. I mean, the reason why we have 404 petitioned species under the Endangered Species Act right now is because the Center for Biological Diversity filed a mega suit and forced the U.S. Fish and Wildlife to review all these. So what do? They just overwhelm the agency. They tie their hands. And so what happens at that time? Species that really need to be reviewed, that really need to be looked at, that need protection, that probably all of us would like to see protected, get overlooked, because we're trying to protect, this snail or this dart, and a bunch of those species they go out and look at, and there's tons of them, and they go, oh, well, there's plenty of those. And they go, okay, we'll just take it off the list, and we don't want to petition that one anymore. And so the things that we should be doing aren't being done. The things that don't need to be done are, or having to be looked at. It's all because the system is set up for abuse. So if you're talking about comprehensive environmental reform, it happens with the way that we allow, people to participate in the system. I'm not saying you lock people out, but you put some guardrails around this thing to where we aren't just running crazy and setting this thing up for a continuous stream of litigation from groups that just want to control land and bog down these agencies. I mean, they need to be going out and doing their job, but I really think the more, and we're seeing this happen now. It just happened with the Endangered Species Act also, is, we had a frog, that the dusky gopher frog, that got listed on a man's land in Louisiana. They locked up his land. The frog hadn't been out there in 50 years. The habitat wasn't even suitable for the frog, but the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service locked up his land, over 1,000 acres, went all the way to the Supreme Court, and Supreme Court came out and said, we're not listing critical habitat on these lands. The frog's not even there. And actually, Justice John Roberts wrote the review, and he actually said there, critical habitat means that, there's actually habitat, and there's no habitat, so how can it be critical habitat? And it was a good report, but it was a good opinion from the court, but what he did, and what's so important here, is he was doing some of that decentralization. Is they sent it back to the circuit court and said, we think the local courts, the lower courts, need to be the ones who determine what habitat is. And so we're starting to see that, I think, progression towards decentralizing all these rules and regulations at the federal level, putting them down to the state level where people can have more input, and also you get more sensible regulation, because these people live in these states, and they know the people in the states, and they know the terrain, and they can make the most sensible regulations. So comprehensive at the federal level probably just change the rules to where it makes more sense how we participate in them, and it's not set up for abuse. And in decentralizing and having those regulations at the state level, in my mind, makes a little more sense.
Well, obviously, it's a lot more complicated than I had thought, and certainly you're an absolute wealth of information. And, Eddie and I have been talking about doing this for the longest period of time, and in conjunction with the land report, and just, I've got to know, because I'll be honest with you, I couldn't spell land 3 years ago. It's through my relationship with Eddie and the exposure that I've had to some of the other people that he works with through the land report that I have really come to appreciate so much of it and been so, enamored with it. He was the one that came and brought to me about, the California wildfire thing. And, Trump has this thing where when it comes out of his mouth, and I like the guy for the most part. I mean, he's got some weird policies, but automatically it's almost like it calls it into suspicion. And I think that was a big part of the problem with what happened in California. Start screaming about, well, it's, too much underbrush, and maybe they raked the yard. Half of California would have burned to the ground. But when I hear that the extensive, because it sounds to me like you guys are in an industry that is just eaten up with bureaucracy. And, I applaud you for what you do and the many things that you bring to the table. Is there anything, as we get ready to wrap up, is there anything in particular, and Eddie, I want you to chime in too, if you'd like to, resources. How can people learn more? Where can they go? Where can they study up on this stuff? Because at the end of the day, guys, at the risk of being maudlin, people died. People died over these policies. I'm not going to go so far as to say the state of California has blood on their hands, but people actually perished in this situation. And we've seen this occur time and time and time again. We've seen it in flood-prone zones, and, I don't know how I feel about them building, New Orleans below sea level and all these other kind of crazy things. But how can people learn more about the very issues that y'all are talking about? Because, quite frankly, I don't think anybody in the national press is even touching these things.
Well, Mike, I want to say one other thing about just the impact of the fires. The federal fire budget has been exploited for years and years and years. And so what ends up happening, and I was talking about this with Fish and Wildlife having to review some of these species, the same thing happens with fires. I mean, the fire budget gets used up, in the first quarter of the year. And so they have to tap into other parts of USDA's budget, more of the Forest Service budget. And so those things that we'd like to be doing, the things that the Forest Service could be out there doing that are very beneficial, can't be done because they're paying firefighters. And so the impacts, the ripple effect of this mismanagement, these fires, it's the people, it's the communities, it's the Forest Service, it's the unintended consequences of what doesn't get done when this money is redirected. And so it has a lot of impact. But I tell you, where you can read a lot about us is on our website. It's forestlandowners.com. There's a lot of information on there. You can go to our issues section, and you can see all the things we're watching, the things we're covering. There's a lot in there and what we're doing for private forest landowners. And you can also sign up for our newsletter there. It's free to sign up. You don't have to be a member. But you can get that information. And, of course, the more informed we are, the better advocates we can be. And the more that we advocate, the more that we discuss this, and the more that we talk to our elected representatives and all at the state and federal level, the better things are going to be.
Scott and I we've been personal friends for over 20 years and have known each other through various publications that I've run. And, the Land Report magazine is actually a member benefit to FLA members. They get the publication, each issue, for free as part of their membership. And I know you and I have had these conversations, Michael. I knew we could get some access to Scott. He just brings a lot to the table today.
Eddie, as long as we have you here, tell the listeners very quickly, if they're interested in the Land Report, where they'll be able to pick up a copy of it, because it's the magazine for the American landowner. And I'll tell you what, it's worth looking at just for the ranches, because I'm going to tell you something. I always thought that I was a fairly successful guy until I read, what's up with a $50 million ranch for sale? But tell them a little bit more about it, how they get a copy of it.
Sure, they can go to landreport.com is our main website, and there's a subscription button to click on there to get an annual subscription. We'll try to figure out some kind of a discount code for your listeners. You can also click on the back issues link and read any current or back issue free of charge. They're digital downloads, flip books. You can read them on your iPad, read them on your laptop. And we're getting ready to come out with our 13th annual Top 100 Landowners. It's a list that we do. We've become known for it. It's been picked up just about every year by Bloomberg News, and one year the Drudge Report picked it up because we had some big movement with the top 2 landowners in the U.S. Currently, the top 1 landowner is John Malone at 2.2 million acres, and Ted Turner's just behind him. And we just track these individuals and families as they divest of acres, as they add acres. They go up and down our list. We have new people come on the list. We have landowners fall off. It's pretty fascinating. By the time your listeners hear this, they can go to landreport.com and get that list for 2018.
We've been having a conversation with Scott Jones of the Forest Landowners Association and Eddie Lee Ryder, publisher of the Land Report. I want to thank you guys for stopping by today. Very informative stuff, and definitely want to get you back on the air again very, very quickly. Heart of America and the Michael Hart Show is brought to you in part by the Unknown America Project. Unknown America, myths and little-known oddities about the greatest nation on earth, explores many of the falsehoods and fallacies and revisions in American history that impact the beliefs and the thoughts of many people in this country today. So if you'd like to learn some of the most enduring myths that have been perpetrated on the American public for the last 100-plus years in this country, go check out the book at heartofamerica.net. That's heartofamerica.net. And pick up a copy of Unknown America. It comes out to you absolutely no shipping, be autographed, and we'll even send you a copy of the United States Constitution as our way of saying thanks. So support the Unknown America Project by simply going to theunknownamerica.com, and thank you for your support.
Does your home have a water problem? Drainage around your home can cause all kinds of headaches. Disease-causing mold, cracks in walls, foundation failure, even roof leaks. At Alabama Water Management, we know that problems can often be fixed from where the water is coming from, outside. Our approach is less invasive and less expensive. So before you spend thousands on a potentially unnecessary waterproofing system, call Alabama Water Management for a free evaluation. Alabama Water Management. Don't waterproof, water prevent.
Find Alabama Water Management on Facebook or on their website at ALAH2O.com.
Anyone can tell you the news.
Welcome, Diamond and Silk.
Mark Zuckerberg will end up, and it's going to be a face without the book.
Book without the face.
Hey, Megan, how are you?
Now they're chipping away at the normalization of pedophilia, and the left is embracing this type of behavior.
Welcome, Dinesh D'Souza.
I know I ticked him off. In a certain sense, it's a giant up yours to Obama, and that's why the left is freaking out over it.
Jack Kennedy and LBJ, Clinton, and the double standard from the left.
I love how the left does nothing but push the most bizarre practices down our throats and up our tailpipes.
It takes a real man to tackle the hot issues that really matter.
Michael Hart is the man of this house.
Welcome to the Michael Hart Show.
Hey, welcome back. Hope you enjoyed our chat there with Scott Jones as well as Eddie Lee Ryder talking about land management in this country and the government's responsibility, things going on in California in terms of Paradise and some of the wildfires out there that are a byproduct of the land management policies in this nation. It is Thursday. We are anticipating our regular weekly speed date with Megan Barth. Megan will be joining us hopefully here shortly. Had a few technological difficulties today. It's just one of those things when you are broadcasting on the internet, but she'll be with us here shortly, and we'll have about 18, 19 minutes with her today. Going to cut it. We're end on time, but we're going to have to cut our time with her short because we're bumping up into against another program that's going to prevent us from going much further. So in the short term, want to invite you to check out heartofamerica.net and kind of chime in there on the Patreon page if you don't mind. That's what keeps us on the air, keeps us chugging along and pumping along, and we would love to have you support the program as we continue to break into, issues such as land management, and really what's going on in this country. There's a lot of talk radio out there. There's a lot of people talking out there, but at the end of the day, there's not a lot of people bringing you the truth and reality of what is going on in the world around us. And so as we look at things like, what Kamala Harris has up her sleeve, or the fact that we have got this fascination, almost incestuous relationship in some states with the concept of late-term abortions and all the struggles that we have in media and all the things that are going to go on as it relates to 2020 and the presidential election. There are very few places, and early in my media career, long before I was in the media, I taught media skills, even before I was in the media myself. And it's very important to understand that one of the most powerful things that we have discovered back in that particular day is what I coined the phrase orphan media. Some people might call it independent media, but since this program has no parent, I kind of, call it orphaned. You're getting most of the legitimate straight talk in your orphan media. You're not getting so much of it out and about in the world these days. And so please support the programs that bring you the straight skinny every single day. The Patreon thing is real easy. It's $6-7 a month. Cancel anytime. It just helps us keep the lights on, buy additional equipment, which, by the way, if we had better equipment, we wouldn't drop off like we do from time to time. Just saying. So also, if you're a business owner and you would like to grow your business online with an amazing deal, $79 a month, get you a spot per day every single day, plus live mentions. For $150, you get 2 of them. So go over to the Patreon page. If you don't want to do it there, just drop me an email. It'll be professionally written and voiced. It's just Michael at heartofamerica.net, heartofamerica.net. And if you are in the southeastern United States, within a couple hundred miles of Birmingham, Alabama, and you would like to have us come out and speak to your group, we would be delighted to do so. We get into some really hot and heavy stuff, and I'm working on this thing. I started working on it yesterday, and I'm not going to elaborate on it right now because it's really pretty deep. But it's going all the way back to the 19-teens, and whether or not the Titanic was sunk intentionally. And I have uncovered some really interesting, I'll admit, circumstantial evidence, but there's a lot of things to look at as it relates to the timing of the sinking, what was going on as it relates to the Federal Reserve Bank, and what particular proponent of their Federal Reserve Act did not make passage on the Titanic, despite the fact that it was pre-booked, and then enter World War I. So anyway, I'm going to do that in about a week, and that's not going to be done on this program. It's actually going to be done on YouTube or some kind of video stream. Maybe we'll do it on Facebook, because I want to add a video component to it to show you some of the things that I've uncovered. But yeah, I love getting into that kind of stuff. I love tying bows on things. And it would appear as though there is a possibility that we uncovered some interesting, again, at least very circumstantial evidence, if nothing else, that might make you just go, And something else that might make you go, is the $840 million in gold bars that were loaded onto a Russian jet at a Venezuelan airport. You see, socialism, fascism, when it collapses, the money folk run, because there's wealth in socialism, there's wealth in fascism. It just obliterates the middle class. About 20 tons of gold from Venezuela's central bank was ready to be hauled away Tuesday on a Russian airline. It was a Boeing 777 that landed in Caracas a day earlier, a Venezuelan lawmaker wrote on Twitter. The destination of the $840 million in gold bars was unknown, but a source told Bloomberg News that it represented about 20% of the country's holding in that particular metal. The gold was set aside for loading, according to the report. The news outlet, which first reported, identified the lawmaker as Jose Guerrera. The lawmaker did not provide evidence for his claim, but is identified in the report as a former economist at the country's central bank with close ties to workers that are still there. Guy, news outlet. Let me see if I can pronounce this. Noticias. You have to say that with an accent. Noticias, Venezuela. A news outlet in the country posted a photo of what is identified as a Nordwind Airlines plane from Moscow that made the trip with only a crew aboard. Now, a guy by the name of Simon Zerpa, who was Venezuela's finance minister, did not comment about the gold when reached by Bloomberg, and denied that there was a Russian plane at the Simon Bolivar International Airport in Caracas, although there's a picture of the plane right there on the tarmac. The point is that Venezuela's economy is collapsing. Now you have got all of this discussion about this, the president, Nicolas Maduro. His staunchest reporter, because Russia is one of his staunchest reporters, is reportedly owed billions by the country of Venezuela. Russia has said it expects Venezuela to have problems repaying debt ahead of upcoming payment on a Russian loan. So, is Maduro skipping town? Is he taking the money and run? go on, take the money, and run. And yet again, you see, and this, by the way, is a microcosm of what could happen here under heavy-handed socialism. Venezuela, sitting on gold bars, which are now leaving on a jet plane, leveraged up to their backsides with the Russians, now in the dark of night, have to put almost $1 billion on a plane in what amounts to stolen gold to repay the Russians. In the meantime, they're rioting in the street. People are starving. Crime is rampant. Kamala Harris couldn't arrest the parents of truant children fast enough. This was a country that was very well heeled prior to taking this turn. It actually all fell apart around the death of Hugo Chavez. Now, Venezuela, at that point in time, was in fact wide open and fascist. But they also controlled assets. Remember Citgo gas, Citgo oil stations? Those were Venezuelan-owned. So, yeah, when you filled up at Citgo, you were supporting the dynasty of Hugo Chavez. So, yet again, more proof that socialism, fascism, and any isms, for that matter, are a detriment to every nation. And by the way, when people say things like, well, there are some countries out there that thrive under these conditions. No, I wouldn't say they thrive. They survive, but their constituencies are the ones that ultimately pay the bill. Because they have no lifestyle, their health care is mandated to them, and quite frankly, they're taxed at an unbelievably high rate. You'd have nothing. There's no, travel abroad sometime and see the living conditions in many of these countries. Most people in America, Democrat or Republican, would be aghast at the loss of creature comforts that they would have to experience for full-fledged socialism. Also, we're going to keep an eye on this Virginia abortion bill. The Governor Northam faces backlash for comments on the third trimester abortion bill. Came under fire yesterday after he waded into the fight over a controversial abortion bill that one sponsor said would allow women to terminate a pregnancy up until the moment before birth, with critics saying that Northam indicated a child could be killed after birth. Now, there have been some in the academic community that have also implied that in the past, but obviously they were not the governor of a state. Northam, whose office is now pushing back on the claims, appeared on a local radio station, WTOP, to discuss the Repeal Act, which seeks to repeal restrictions on third trimester abortions. Virginia Democratic Delegate Kathy Tran, one of the sponsors, sparked outrage from conservatives when she was asked at a hearing if a woman about to give birth and dilating could still request an abortion. Now, this particular bill was in fact tabled this week, but she said, quote, "My bill would allow that, yes." Northam, a former pediatric neurologist, was asked about those comments and said he couldn't speak for Tran, but he said that third trimester abortions are done with the, quote, consent of obviously the mother, because, you kind of want that. Obviously the mother, with consent of the physician, multiple physicians, by the way, and is done in cases where there may be severe deformities and there may be a fetus that is not viable. Every obstetrician worth their salt in America has already said you ain't going to find that out at the last moment. You would have known about severe deformities or a non-viable fetus months prior. That is a load of crap. America, in addition to moving into a more socialist mindset, we are becoming a culture of death. I even put a hashtag out yesterday. It was the Kill Me Too movement. So, this is a quote. In this particular example, if a mother is in labor, I can tell you exactly what would happen. The infant would be delivered. The infant would be kept comfortable. The infant would be resuscitated if that's what the mother and family desired, and then a discussion would ensue between the physicians and the mother. That's what got the governor in trouble. Because some are implying, he seems to be implying it himself, that this life could be terminated post-birth. I don't like the color of his hair. I don't like the fact that she has no hair. That wasn't what I was expecting. It's a boy. Well, nah. Yeah, that's where we're going in this country. I also want to point out something else very quickly. The consent, this is again from Northam, whether or not we're going to abort in the third trimester. The consent of obviously the mother, with consent of the physician, multiple physicians, by the way, and it's done in cases where there may be severe deformities, et cetera, et cetera. What's missing from that statement? The consent of the father? Folks, not only are we not winning the abortion argument, we're losing it in a breakneck pace. So, how many people do you think are out there? Because I posted something about New York online a few weeks ago, and I was basically, told I was ginning up an issue that wasn't there. Virginia's worse than New York. And see, this is what happens when people don't get outraged. You're not going to have a lot of the deep conversations. Let me tell you something very quickly. As we get ready to wrap this thing up, we're going to have to reschedule Megan. Because this broadcast is being brought to you on the internet, I am not, at least at the moment, I am not being held accountable, nor am I in a situation where I have to worry about FCC regulations. I don't have to check my viewpoints. I don't even have to check my language. You need to support this kind of media because we've got to get the message out across this country that we need to stand in defiance of these things. Although I'm getting very tight on time, and I don't have my call screener board. I know they got a call or two up here, so I'm just going to jump right out there real quick. And who am I speaking with?
Hey, Michael, it's Murph.
Hey, buddy, how are you?
Doing all right. I was thinking about this. Two things real quick. One, Margaret Sanger was friends with Hitler, and these are the same conversations they were having prior to World War II. And not only that, since Roe v. Wade, we have managed to murder 41 million babies. Hitler only killed 11 million Jews and Christians.
Right.
So we are absolutely going down the wrong path. But if you remember, during the Obama administration, college professors began to talk about self-actualization and viability of children up to 5 years old. They want to be able to abort children up to 5 years old because they think they're not self-actualized.
You are absolutely correct.
Disgusting.
It is. And more people need to realize that. I mean, I think a lot of people think that it's just completely a fantasy. And the reality of it is simply not. You're absolutely right.
What did Tommy Lee Jones say? Individuals are smart, people are stupid.
Mm-hmm. You're right.
You can corner one person and you can convince that one person that abortion is wrong, but when you put them in a crowd, they don't have the guts to stand up and say it's wrong. So.
No, you're right. You're absolutely right. Merv, I appreciate the call, buddy. Getting tight on time. Sir. I'm about to lose the signal here in about 3 minutes, but I appreciate you chiming in. Please do it again very soon. All right, let's get to Clark's calling here real quick. Hey, Clark, only got a couple of minutes, buddy.
Murph is exactly right. they're paving the way for, if you don't like your 5-year-old, you can have it put down as a post-birth abortion. Here's the thing I'm thinking, Michael. This is not so much to the Democrats about aborting babies as it is they understand that young females, you tell them that somebody wants to control their body, and they will automatically have this reflexive response, nobody's controlling my body.
Mm-hmm.
And
you're right.
It's a success. It's a wedge issue where they can get people to vote for them. They will kill babies for votes.
Yeah,
and that's
no, you're exactly right. You are right. And it's horrific on every level.
And yeah, and again, I think Murph is right. Probably Hitler is high-fiving Margaret Sanger in hell.
Yep. I think you're spot on, Clark. I definitely do. We've definitely become a culture of death in this country, and we are, as both of you have pointed out, we are going the wrong direction.
Knock on wood, the pendulum will swing. Michael, I know you're tight on time. I'll let you wrap it up.
Thank you, Clark. Appreciate it so very much. Spread the word, spread the word, spread the word, guys. These things really are going on around us, and this is one of the reasons that we ask you to support this program and support any of the other type of media that are out there. The national news services are just paying lip service to this stuff. Some of them are talking about it, but not nearly as in-depth, and we're going to get a little more in-depth with this over the course of the next several days. Now, tomorrow is our situational security edition. We are going to be joined by a couple of gun rights experts, and we're going to be, and a pastor as well. We're going to be talking about whether or not Virginia is correct, and we are going to be able, or the bill anyway, to carry our firearms in a place of worship. And so we'll be talking about that tomorrow and the legalities of being able to defend yourself when you are worshiping the Lord. That's it for us. Please check us out again, heartofamerica.net, heartofamerica.net. Support us through the Patreon link if you can. There are some other folks out there that do it privately, and it's very much appreciated. But if we're going to continue to report this and have these conversations and spread the word about what's really going on in this nation, you need to support the media that is out there willing to do just that. Because, folks, we are losing this country. We are aborting a baby at birth. Did you ever? I mean, did you ever? We are becoming a genderless, lifeless culture of death right before our very eyes. Help us out. Help us spread the word. You'll listen to the Michael Hart Show right here on the Heart of America Talk Radio Network. Tomorrow, the Situational Security edition of the program. And also check out The Unknown America, theunknownamerica.com for all of, the myths and little known oddities about the greatest nation on earth. That's it for us. Back with you tomorrow. You listen to the Michael Hart Show right here on the Heart of America Talk Radio Network.